Thank you so much for joining us. This is Harry Caruso, founder of Caruso Co. And today we are joined by Ray Pickens, who is the Vice President of Operations for America's Car Mart, coming to us with decades, over 40 years of experience in the tire and auto service space. And we are going to be discussing everything that's going on in the tire industry between the financial sponsors, the recent investments, and all the trends that are going on. Ray, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to an exciting conversation about a great industry.
Yeah, and we are tremendously excited to have this opportunity here because, as I briefly mentioned, you're bringing decades and actually having witnessed multiple cycles throughout this entire sort of
hmm
universe. And so very curious to get your take as to generalistically what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling on your end in terms of all this private equity money coming in and where the market sits as a whole.
Sure. So if you think about it, for years, the industry was made up of large chains, regional chains, and then independent, one, two shop owners. And more recently, with the injection of equity from the private equity group, a lot of these more robust regional players have kind of been gobbled up. Um, some larger companies have spun off some of their retail operations to PE so that they could focus on distribution, things like that. So with that, it's really driven up the multiples on these businesses to higher than what most industries will bring in this acquisition arena. And the other side of it too, Harry, is now that a lot of these regional players have been gobbled up, folks are starting to think there's a stall in availability. There's no more regional players. Where are we going to look for these acquisitions? But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of independent tire dealers out there, which actually are now in a good position because they may be able to get more for their business, but they don't have an exit strategy. They're not familiar with PE. They're not sure how to go about doing this. And on the flip side, some of your larger PE groups, you have to think, do I want to try to acquire a 30 store chain, or do I want to try to acquire 31 store chains? And the amount of work in an acquisition, as far as the diligence, the list is the same. So, it may not be as appealing, but that's where the opportunities really lie to continue to consolidate this industry and start going after these independents. And there's some very well run operations out there. And then the other piece to that too, Harry, you got to balance, because obviously as larger companies acquire locations, they want to absorb them into their culture, their processes, kind of integrate them into their way of doing things. And you have to be careful too, because some of these folks have been in operations for years and are a staple in the neighborhood. They're a household name, they're family owned and operated. So there's always that balance between, do we lose that? Do we keep that? How do we maintain that legacy? So just a lot of unprecedented opportunities still in this industry.
Ray, I feel everything that you're saying is what we feel on our end and what we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing. So, to take us back to sort of square one here, I think
Yeah.
one thing that's never fully addressed, and we would love to get your opinion on, is what is this whole consolidation game as pertaining to tire retailers, tire stores, tire shops? Why are they being consolidated, and to what benefit is that actually bringing to the table for the consolidators?
Yeah, there's a couple benefits. Obviously, um, building the brand by adding additional locations, larger footprint, deeper market penetration, key market penetrations in A markets and B markets. The other thing that you can leverage as you get size is buying power, distribution. If you're that mid-level operator, you're going to be able to leverage size and probably get better cost, better pricing, better rebates, a higher level of service because you have more locations. And then as you get big enough, you may want to branch off and create distribution within your own network. And that's when you can really get some savings. And there's some out there, Harry, some, tire stores that are also manufacturers, a couple common names like Firestone, Goodyear. So then you get the benefit of having more locations, perhaps if you're have a manufacturing piece tagged on there and a distribution piece, now you're creating profit centers within your organization in other verticals besides just the company-owned stores. So
Sure.
the
Yeah.
bigger you get, the more opportunities there are for that.
So I think tire presents a very interesting uh,
Mm-hmm.
perspective on what can be done by way of vertical integration that I don't think many other parts of the aftermarket automotive universe can.
Mm-hmm.
With dealerships, you only can go so far up. You're not becoming an OEM,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But private label does work in tire, and it's not dissimilar to what we're seeing the big push for and wave of in convenience, which is
Mm-hmm.
private labeled, goods in the convenience stores themselves. So
Yep.
that makes total sense. But what you're saying, Ray, is there is true cost savings to be had by these consolidators. Um,
Absolutely.
so then if we take that one step further in terms of a really well-run independent operator, single store, do
Mm-hmm.
they what impact does this have on them?
It'll it'll likely drive their cost up in some cases as an independent because they won't be able to leverage that volume. Now, that being said, most business is said to be a relationship business, whether you're fixing cars, selling tires, washing cars, or selling shoes, it's a relationship business. So keep in mind too, some of these independents have been in business for years in their area and they have relationships with distributors, they have relationships with other suppliers, they have relationships with manufacturers. And so there may be some grace there and some goodwill that'll allow them some leverage. But over time, keep in mind that automotive repair and tires is not the only consolidation going on there. So is distribution, so is manufacturing. So as those counterparts to the actual repair shop begin to consolidate and get bigger, that is also going to put a little bit of pressure because it takes away some of that ability for that independent to maintain that relationship because the supplier they've been doing business with for years just got purchased by a consolidator. And now that goes out the window.
We saw it in the car wash industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where whether before, after, leading or lagging, that can be argued on an individualized transactional basis. But when the people you have 50-year relationships with are no longer the people in the seats they were in,
Mm-hmm.
as a supplier, that supplier relationship is non-transferable, if you will.
Right. And look, some of these independents, I mean, there are some fantastic business operators out there. I've met several in my career. I know you've met several in your career. And, they talk about it being the person behind the counter is what makes that place. So a lot of independents will weather these storms, but there are some, and I've heard this, in a near quote, when I was with other companies doing acquisitions and you're talking to the owner and they're like, I just don't, I love what I do. I love my customers. I love the legacy we built, but I just don't feel like dealing with the rest of it anymore. I know I have to open extended hours. I know I've got to start opening on Sundays. I know I got to start opening later. I know I've got to do all these things to be competitive and I just don't have it in me. So their solution is sell my business, take good care of my people, take good care of my customers, but relieve me of that anxiety and stress of having to be the one to do some tough things. Or I've been in business for 40 years and I'm tired. I don't have family to take over the business, I want to retire. I want to ride off into the sunset and, I want to cash out and take my money and go. And so, here we come.
Hard to argue with that motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta
Yep.
say, that one is a tough one to argue with. And everything you're saying, we saw over the last 7 years in the car wash space. However, to your earlier point, one thing I will bring up that is remarkably unique and beyond transparent when you look into this industry as a whole, the average tenure of ownership of tire retailers across this country is outstandingly longer than anything else I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the average owner's been owning their stores for 30 something years at this
Hmm.
point, whether it be in the family or not. It's wild how long people have been in this business.
And it's a lucrative business. It's a relationship business, as we talked about. And one thing that there's a lot of resilience in this industry. There are several industries that are resilient, but when it comes to your car, in order to get to work, to get the kids to school, to get to church, to get wherever you need to go, you have to have your car. And the average age of cars continues to nudge up a little bit, especially now with the downturn, and with everything we went through after COVID, with the chips and availability of parts and, new car sales slowing down a little bit. It just creates an even bigger opportunity for the aftermarket. And as I've said to you before, Harry, regardless of the economy, tires still continue to wear out. And now with the influx of hybrid and other cars, there's still a huge opportunity to expand into that market. Hybrid tires tend to wear quicker than than your internal combustion engine vehicles, and more manufacturers are making the tires to spec because they want a tire to fit a certain criteria for their vehicle. So now there's a broader assortment of tires that are going to be necessary, and so it's this industry just continues to have non-discretionary demand. So
And you know and color me a fool or naive, but one of the most interesting things as you start exploring the different aftermarket automotive sectors is you would think the same as applies to collision. Does it?
mm-mm,
No, no. You can get away with leaving the dent on your car. You can't with tires that are pulled.
right.
So it's
And other maintenance on the car too. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is there's verticals within the repair shop of, oil changes. Okay, there's some maintenance, there's some fluids, there's repair when things break, things wear like brakes, and then you have the tires, and then all the related services, because you don't just put the tires on the car. You're programming or rebuilding the TPMS sensors. You're doing an alignment. There's other maintenance that you can suggest to the consumer, things that are, hey, at this particular point in time in your car, you should be doing these maintenance items. And then there's two schools of thought there. Do I maintain the car to help reduce overall expense? Or do I just wait for something to break and then I'll fix it when it breaks? There's two schools out there for all that too. But you're right. You don't have to get that dent fixed. I don't have to have that latest and greatest new outfit by that, that new brand, but I've got to keep my car going. I've got to be able to get around.
and it's the forced milestone, if you will, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
some of us don't like going to doctors in our personal lives, right? We'll put off going to the doctor as long as possible, or the dentist, right? Getting your tire, this is what you cannot avoid. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
learn about what needs to be repaired while you're there, but is
Right.
that forced event you cannot avoid. So one thing though, right, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this that I find a bit perplexing is the building of new tire shops,
Mm-hmm.
because unlike so many other industries, especially discretionary industries such as car wash, where it's very elastic by way of demand, the tire demand within a certain MSA is rather predictable. So these groups that are building new boxes, is the play there just to split the pre-existing pie, or am I missing something?
There will be some of that. The hope is that you'll cannibalize some of the competition, but you won't. Surprisingly enough, even in major metro areas, and follow me on this because I can think to my time when I lived in Baltimore. There's a main thoroughfare through a certain part of town, and folks that live on the west side of that thoroughfare typically never cross to the east side of that thoroughfare because of the amount of traffic. So they shop and things on this side. They may commute on that main thoroughfare to somewhere downtown, but they'll do most of their shop. And we've had locations in previous lives where we've had two tire shops 4 miles apart, and the two of them together will do more business than either one ever could have by themselves, just
See
because of
that
capacity. In order to increase business in a tire shop, there's a couple things you have to do. You either have to increase car count, get more traffic through. You have to increase the average ticket, sell more stuff on each car, or you have to add bays. So you have more holes to put cars in. And when you're reaching capacity there, you build another location. And there will be some bleed off, but then you're going to attract customers that may not be coming to this location who might be farther out. Maybe the wait time was too long, and now they can, now you've reduced wait times. So there's benefit to building additional locations. Plus, you get more brand presence, you get more market penetration. There's think about the amount of cars on the road any given day in any given city, and you don't have enough capacity to service them all. So I don't think you're ever going to run out of opportunity.
That makes sense, and it's not something that immediately, hits you straight dead in the face when you're thinking about this industry as a whole, but it does make sense to me. One thing that I think people are very much underestimating in terms of tire shops and what the future lies for tire and repair is the entire ADAS calibration side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Because in
Yep.
my personal opinion, and if we go back to that sort of that forced doctor's visit, you can put it
Yep.
off as long as you want until you need to. But when you need to, they're going to find all the dirty laundry. And one of those things that they're going to find, and where I think the most arguably naturalistic place for ADAS calibration to truthfully find its home is in tire shops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are folks that are thinking about that and have been thinking about that and ways to, I say get ahead of the curve because we're really not ahead of the curve at this point because all that has been out for a while. But a lot of folks have left it to the specialty shops to deal with that kind of stuff. And pretty soon you're not going to be able to because more and more vehicles are equipped with that OE. And now a lot of those vehicles are entering that window of age where they're now they're not going to the dealerships anymore. Now they're going to independents and some of these volume retailers that we've been talking about. And Harry, that brings up another point. If I'm an independent shop owner and I'm like, wow, to be competitive, I'm going to have to spend, I don't know, let's put a number on it, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 to get some of this equipment to be able to service some of these cars. I don't know that I want to inject that type of capital into my business at this point. So what do? I look for an exit strategy. Look for somebody that has, that capital, and that's, thinking about PE and some of the larger players, they have that financial backing to be able to make those investments in that new technology. And, whether it's calibration, whether it's EV, I mean, cars will continue to evolve and companies will have to continue to make, investments in technology at the service level, as well as technology at the consumer level, because we have to continue to evolve with the consumer and meet them where they are. And, I think back to my early days in automotive when it was a fight to get the right page of the sports section to put our ad in, and then it evolves to radio and TV. And now it's like, everything's digital. I mean, you need to invest in technology. Customers want to be able to get a text on their phone that their car's done, pay their bill, come in, pick up the car, leave. They want, it's a hassle-free experience, and it takes any investment in technology to do that. So
There's a lot to unpack there, Ray. I couldn't agree more with
absolutely.
everything you're saying. I'll tell you what I think is so very fascinating, not to put a tinfoil hat on, not to get too out there, but to me, the way I view all of this in terms of where it all goes in the end is running your errands on your way home from the office nowadays, if you're even going to the office, you're making
Mm-hmm.
far less frequent stops than you were 10 years ago, let alone 20. So these
Mm-hmm.
sort of points of contact that you have are worth infinitely more with potential clients. And I think
Absolutely.
the tire and the repair centers are one of those ones that are going to last. And that's why we're seeing in the convenience store side of things, no longer is it the way to go in terms of separating it, having a dumpy convenience store and a good gas station. You're not getting away with that. You're not getting
Mm-hmm.
people to stop at every single stop.
Right.
You need to bring more to the table in order to garnish that foot traffic. And I think that this is the trend that we're going to see here. And I think tire retailers as a whole, tire and repair are going to end up standing the test of time as being one of those epicenters of the
Mm-hmm.
automotive visit.
Yep. Yeah, and there's again within that, there's probably two or more schools of thought. One could be like we talked about earlier. You've got a shop that specializes in tire and tire related services. And that's where you invest extra money in the upgrades to technology. And that's where speed becomes a factor, because today's consumer, they're packing 25 hours worth of stuff into a 24-hour day. We all do it. So I need to get in, I need to get out. And you think about the business as a whole, and you think about folks that specialize in tire, you think about the quick lube industry, where it's quick oil change, you're 10 minutes or less, much like a lot of the car washes. You're in that 3-minute tunnel, you're just shooting through. Maybe I'll use the free vacuum, maybe I won't, but it's hurry, hurry, hurry. But then on the flip side, to your point, I don't want to go to 3 different places. I want to be able to go, and I want to be able to get my oil changed fast. I want to be able to get my tires done fast. I need brakes. I know Harry. I trust Harry. I'm going to go down there to Harry's and get it taken care of. It's convenient. It's right on my way to pick up the kids from school. It's right on the way to, home from the office in the afternoon. So, that relationship piece comes back. But I still want it to be done quickly. I want it to be done correctly. We throw the word around trust in the industry, and it sounds cliche when you say it, but the consumer really wants to be able to get their car fixed, get their car serviced, get their car maintained, and go on about their life and not have to worry about it. And know that the job was done right, know that they paid a fair price, know that it was a good value, know that their car's in good working condition, so they don't have to think about that anymore. And so there's a big piece that we have to make sure, as we consolidate and get bigger, that as a company, it's about margin, it's about EBITDA, it's about footprint, but we can't forget that customer experience, and making sure that no matter how big we get, we never lose touch with the most important piece of that is making sure that customer gets that service that they're expecting, that they're needing, and not having to worry about it when they get in their car and drive out to go pick up Sally from soccer practice. I don't want to have to worry that, my tire's loose, or you didn't put enough oil in my car, you didn't plug something back in. So, we got to be careful with that too.
Absolutely. And this isn't a trust in the way of people, maybe what you would quintessentially think of trust, right? It's reliability. They need to know that when they come to you to have something done, you are going to be able to competently and quickly do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that trust doesn't come overnight, but it goes away overnight.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's for
Quick,
sure.
quick to lose.
Yes, very much so. So switching back towards the valuation side, let's
Mm-hmm.
dig in a little bit here because, Ray, I primarily spent the last 7 years now on the car wash side, which I think 7 years ago, if you said to anybody I was going to spend 7 years on the car wash side, they would think that you're an absolute lunatic in general, which is fair. Now it doesn't seem so crazy, hindsight. But in that side of the business, to say that there was huge oscillations in valuations over the past decade, let alone 5 years, would be an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be lying to say we're not seeing early to mid innings of a very similar trend on the valuation side in terms of what these groups are paying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In automotive, the multiples have continued to accelerate, and they're much higher. Companies are paying a much larger multiple for a successful automotive service and tire facility than they would be for other, do it for you industries, HVAC, some other things. So, car wash had big multiples. I mean, we're seeing multiples with some of these deals, double digits. 10 used to be a surprising multiple. Now we're seeing multiples of 15, 16, 13, I think is kind of that, that average of where we're seeing these multiples on a lot of these bigger deals. And that's huge. So zoom out, on these big deals. Now zoom in to that independent shop who thought, man, if I can just get enough to retire, that'd be great. Well, it might be 3, 4, 5, 10 times what they thought that business was worth, because that's what some of the multiples are paying. So you have to think, look, you've got to make your business attractive for a larger consolidator to come after. So, get your financials in order, make sure that things are buttoned up, make sure that everything's clean. When you're an independent operator, there might be a little bit of looseness in there because it's just you. It's you, it's your CPA, it's your attorney. But you got to get all that buttoned up. So if you have a big consolidator coming in, and they want to do some diligence and see if, why are you selling? What's your business worth? Let's look at the valuation. The easier that process is for them, the more likely you are to get some of these consolidators to be more anxious to dig down and do those 41 store acquisitions instead of one 40 store acquisition. So
That I couldn't agree with, but I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here because I think there's a balance also in what you said, in that if there's one message I could get across to individual 2Z, 3Z site owners, do not kill yourself to think that if you had your son-in-law on your payroll, that is going to deduct value from your business. The
right,
buyers in today's market are sophisticated enough where if there's one number that's the almighty, it's units and it's dollars of revenue. You can get credit back for some of the profitability that you may be benefiting from as a small business owner. That's why you did it in the first place, to be the beneficiary of
sure,
sort of benefits. So I couldn't agree more in terms of the operations being clean. You certainly need the revenue reported, that's for darn sure.
absolutely,
But you're not going to get, the hatchet brought down on you if for some reason your personal, a porch that you built last year shows up on your tax return. That'll be added, that'll be adjusted for.
right.
So there's some moving around there. I think, Ray, one other thing on this heightened valuation range sort of discussion is, has enough changed in the industry over the last 10 years to warrant multiples going from 4 to 5 to 13?
I think a lot of what's driving that, Harry, is not just evolution in the industry, but I also think it's interest in the industry.
Yeah.
And, the more folks that are interested, if it was just you and I, we'd be competing against each other and the price might nudge up a little bit. Then you bring in some other folks that have more equity to, inject into these businesses. It creates a new layer of multiple. And then as some of the bigger regional players have gotten gobbled up and there's less, I guess, for lack of a better term, let's call it less inventory, that starts to drive the price up because, I can't, well, this deal didn't work out, so we'll just go do this other deal. Well, that other deal is not there anymore. Somebody else bought it already. So now you got to be coming in higher. So it's just driving the multiple. It's the whole supply and demand, right?
And
So
it works until it doesn't.
correct.
And I think we're a bit away from it not working on the tire side. I can speak very openly in saying on the car wash side, the gig is up. And it has been for some time. We're seeing national scale bankruptcies. We're seeing leverage levels that are just unfathomable and
Absolutely.
inconceivable as to somebody ever expecting that to work out for them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was overzealousness, but the vast majority of it was literally, to your point, supply and demand. And I'll tell you, it's exponential because when that opportunity that you came back to and now maybe you're willing to pay up for wasn't there and you have to go to the third, all of a sudden you're not up 1 turn or 2 turns, you're up 4 turns. That
Right.
exponentiality is a very real thing. Uh,
Yeah.
Not to completely switch over here, but one thing that's interesting to me, and I'd be very interested to get your take given your experience, Ray, is not every tire and repair shop is going to be applicable to this roll-up strategy.
True.
Car wash side of things, what we always sort of used as the litmus test is the site certainly in all ways, shapes, and forms has to be at least capable of washing over 100,000 cars a year. And that's a factor of the physicality of the location, the site layout, the surrounding demographics, the competition profile. But if you're not going to hit that sort of minimum bar, chances are a consolidator is not going to be interested. So my question to you is, do you think that sort of proverbial bar exists as pertaining to tire consolidators? And if so, what do you think the correct measure for such is?
It does. But the second half of that is a little bit of a challenge because when we say tire shop, we're lumping several different business models into one. And, a tire shop, Harry, will do mechanical work. They'll do tire work. They'll do oil changes. But surprisingly enough, some of your tire shops are primarily mechanical work and very little in tires. So now there's your upside from a revenue standpoint. So if you're going to base your benchmark on straight revenue, your revenue on service only may be a little bit lower because you don't have that high ticket item of a 4-tire sale at $1,200 or $1,500 pushing up that ticket average. But if you're heavy in tires and light in service, now you're going to have that high revenue, but your margin's going to be a little bit lower because you're not making the same percentage on tire and tire related services as you would on mechanical and labor, depending on whether you look at your labor loaded with mechanic pay or unloaded without. I mean, without, labor's 100% margin, right? So it's hard to plug that in and say, well, it needs to be doing $1 million in revenue. Okay, $1 million in revenue in tire sales is a lot different than $1 million in revenue in service. What's the mix of business? I can tell you mix of business is important. The world looks at 50-50. Well, they're 50% mechanical, 50% tires. It's not always that way. So where do you gain that leverage when you look at this particular repair facility? What is their current mix of business? Where is my opportunity? Is my opportunity in increasing mix on one side of the business? Is my opportunity as a larger dealer with leverage on purchasing? Do I have opportunities in margin where I may be able to infuse more margin with my better buying cost? Is my opportunity in labor? How is the current owner paying versus what might be a more current and competitive pay structure that's more pay per performance? So there's a lot of pieces that go into it, but you want to look at car counts. It's always good to see a steady increase of car count that tells you that, we're not losing traffic. It's always to see a good steady increase in ticket average, not too heavy. You don't, as long as the mix is the same. If your mix goes heavier tires, obviously your average ticket's going to climb a little bit quicker. But you want to make sure that we're adding additional services, that we're doing all those add-on ancillaries with tire sales, that we're doing the add-on ancillaries with mechanical service. So to say it's just, hey, if it hits this criteria, and this criteria, it's a great business to buy, tough to say. The car wash may be a little bit less convoluted because it's, hey, am I getting the basic wash? Am I getting the better wash? Or am I getting the primo wash? But how many cars can I get through that tunnel in a day? How many cars can I get through the shop in a day? Well, if your model is more heavy this way, you're going to have less cars. But if your model might be this way, you're going to have more cars. So you gotta really look at the pieces of the business and where you gain the most leverage. And every acquisition I've been involved in, that's the first thing you look at is what's their business mix now? What are their margins now? How's their car count? How's their ticket average? What opportunities do I have to expand services, to add additional, you might have a shop that specializes in European cars. Okay. Can I broaden what European cars I'm going to service? What about my customers that have a Mercedes, but they also have a Ford truck? Do I not service their Ford truck because I only service Mercedes? Get back to your earlier question. Maybe I need to open a second shop in the neighborhood that now I can do, all types of makes and models over here to cater to all my customers while I'm servicing just the European stuff over here in my specialty shop. Maybe I've got that tire only shop that has all the specialty, latest and greatest technology, and I'm focusing on tires over here, but I've got a second shop in the area that does the mechanical service, and maybe I've got a quick lube around the corner in case you want a 10-minute oil change, I can take care of you too. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Oh, it answers the question, although I'd be lying to say it doesn't create a couple more.
I'm sure it does.
So here's something I've been curious about. Do you think that there's a different ideal mix for two different consolidator groups in the arena?
Oh,
So,
100%.
and why,
100%.
what's driving that? Why would one group want to see more service than tire versus vice versa?
A lot of times it's in their mind who they are. So they look for businesses that are who they are, or they look for businesses that can transition to who they are. Like if I'm a tire only, like tire discounters, if I'm going out, now granted tire discounters does mechanical repairs and things as well in their locations, but if I'm a consumer, I'm going to them because I think they sell tires.
Yeah.
So am I going to look for a business that's 95% service and 5% tires by default, not by desire, but by necessity? The facility doesn't have any place to stock tires, so everything's going to have to be delivered in. They've got 5 bays, and there's really not a lot of room to put tire. Is that facility going to be conducive? Is that current business model going to be conducive to me when I want to make a larger portion of my business tires, or vice versa?
Where does the behemoth of like a Mavis or like as a Sun, like what are some groups that are quintessentially considered more one versus the other?
Yeah, when you get into Mavis, when you get into some of those large consolidators, you've got Mavis, you've got Sun, you've got Les Schwab. There's a big piece of the tire business there. But surprisingly enough, when you look, and this has probably migrated a bit more recently, but back a decade or so ago, you have a company like Goodyear, and so you think Goodyear, like, they're a tire shop. That's all they do is tires. But Goodyear was a heavier percentage of service over tires.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And over time that will tend to evolve, but it's not just the name that makes the business. It's what consumers go to them for. So back in my day when I worked for a Goodyear retailer, sure, we sold plenty of tires, don't get me wrong, but there was more cars there for brakes and mechanical work and things like that than there was for tires. And the reason for that is everything has a frequency, oil changes and things like that being the most frequent. Then you start to get into the next realm of things. How long are tires going to last? They're designed to last longer and longer now. That's the selling point. Like, hey, it's not a 40,000 mile tire, it's an 80,000 mile tire. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but everything has a frequency. But back to that whole trust thing, back to that whole convenience thing, it's like, I don't want to go all these different places or to all these different brands to get work done, but so when I need brakes, I'm going to go to the same place to put my tires on. Now, back to what I was saying before, where you might have a tire only shop and then maybe I have a quick lube around the corner and then a mechanical place. Again, you've got that trust element, but a lot of these retailers that talk about tires do a lot of mechanical work as well. And there's margin in it, and there's additional revenue in it. So why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I think that this exact aspect as pertaining to brick and mortar realty as a whole is an interesting topic because funny enough,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at a company the other day that has done a phenomenal job with combining dry cleaners with drive-through coffee. The idea being
Mm-hmm.
that the client's touch is that very important that we need to find other ways to bolt stuff on here because they don't want to stop at places. You can do both ones. They're
Mm-hmm.
throwing you your dry cleaning while they're shoving a coffee at your face. So, and it's working. But on the car
Think
wash,
about
yeah,
think about that on the car wash side too. You've got crossover between car wash and car service. I've seen quick lubes and car washes teamed up. You get your car wash and you get your oil change, or you get your oil change and you get your car washed. And often when you get one service, there's a discounted on the other service. So it's like bang bang. I'll just get them both done while I'm here.
so here's what's interesting with the car wash. What we've seen over the last 7 years during this last sort of boon from institutional investors is the actual delineation and specification of not even being full service. If you want to vacuum your own car, you have to vacuum it. And the
Mm-hmm.
segregation of that of the oil changes from the car wash. And I think it's safe to say, beyond just anecdotally, that a lot of that is due to the fact that when you do combine multiple business units together and revenue streams, it's so very easy to kind of neglect one and focus on the other.
Yeah.
And the key is that doesn't work in anything. You have to
Mm-hmm.
care about both. And it sounds like the tire and the service side has enough overlap where you can truthfully nurture and properly maintain both aspects.
Yeah. And you'll see too that a lot of these chains that we're talking about, these consolidators, these national brands, while they will do mechanical repair, they will do tires, they try to avoid the more technical time. Like, I don't want to replace transmissions, I don't want to replace engines. there are a lot of these independents will still do that type of work because it's inherent to, they've been in business in their local area forever. And, the Jones family's been bringing all their cars to them for everything. So if the motor went up, they would replace the motor. But a lot of your bigger chains don't do that. It's a slower bay turn, more technical. You talk about full service car wash versus express tunnel. What's one of the major savings from going to full service to express? It's labor, right? So you don't have to have, in the auto service industry, you don't have to have all brain surgeons working at your shop. You don't need brain surgeons doing stitches. So you condense down some of the services you offer, and it gives you a better ability to staff someone who can do multiple services under that umbrella versus, higher technical labor. Now, that being said, there's still a huge demand and a bigger shortage. Always has been a shortage in the 40 plus years I've been doing this, of great technicians that, can do technical work. And I think we went through a period of time in our history over the last 4 decades where, vocational trade kind of fell off, and it was more about making sure I had that degree. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but without that trade, that focus on trade, it's limited, not just automotive, it's eliminated, HVAC. It's probably had an impact on the car wash industry. It's had impact on manufacturing. It's had a lot of impacts on the ability to find good qualified help. So
I'll tell you what, Ray, I read one of the, I don't know if you caught this, I don't know why you would, Chewy, the pet company,
yeah,
laid off 80% of their employees by and large due to automation.
It's well, I was going to say, it's not because of us, because we have 4 dogs and there's a Chewy box on our porch every other week. But now that you say automation, that makes a lot of sense. But you can't automate repairing a car. You could try. There's people that talked about an oil change machine that would do it, but I mean, I don't know. We're probably way, way, way long away from that. It's not like an automated bartender. So
no, but so that's the funniest thing. So Ray, and for the audience listening, my background, I came from engineering. I was not a finance major, despite us being an investment bank. And I specifically focused on linear and nonlinear programming and algorithms. And I'll tell you this right now, not everything should be automated. There are some things that the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I think one of the most quintessential examples is that of financial statement analysis. The SEC regulates the way in which you file them. And still to this day, despite the amount of money to be made in financial analysis between hedge funds, private equity, investors, retail, anything you want, we still have not figured out a way to homogenize and compare financials in a reliable manner. Leave it alone. Let's leave that not automated. Car repair, tire replacement, I think we're okay having a person there. But it's funny because the other industries here that didn't require vocational training and maybe were more tailored towards that of the technological and software development background, we're seeing layoffs. So,
well, I can tell you there will never be enough technicians for the auto repair and many do it for you industries. There'll never be enough technicians. So, getting into a trade is not a bad idea, for folks to talk about early on. That's the decision I made when I was in the 8th grade, that I asked parents, they're all educators, Harry. I told you this before, teachers, principals, they've all been in the school system. And I'm the one that came to them one day and said, hey, I think I want to go to a vocational high school and be an automotive technician. And they were supportive, and I applied and I was accepted. And, I went to high school for auto mechanics, and I was working at a shop, for my junior and senior year. That's how I got my grade. So, there's a lot of value to that. And I think that the last 40 years have worked out okay. So I've been in a great industry that is recession resistant, but needs a lot of good talent. And, to our earlier conversation about the advances and the evolution of technology, it's going to need funding, and it's going to need equity ingested. It's a necessary evil or a necessary benefit, whichever side of that fence you're on. Either way, that's the direction we're going. So
yeah, and it might be one for some amount of time and then switch to the other. So I think, Ray, we've covered a ton. And before giving final thoughts here and anything we want to leave the listeners or viewers with, touching or piggybacking on your last comment, the penultimate automation is autonomous driving.
Hmm.
Where does that all play in here on the tire and the repair side of things?
So it creates a new dimension because now we talk about technology. Now there's going to be new technology to learn. And that's the other thing too, Harry, is it's one thing to invest in the technology and the equipment to be able to service these vehicles. It's another thing to invest in the technology and knowledge to teach your folks how to use that equipment and how to service these vehicles. And it's an ever changing, like, you always hear all the cliches, I never paid that much for this, or I never had to do that before. Well, yeah, you didn't have to do that before because cars didn't do that before. Now they do. So we have to have, higher skill. We have to have more training, and it's ongoing. There has to be continuous learning in this industry and continuous investment in this industry. So whether it's autonomous driving, look, do cars that have the autonomous driving capability, do they have tires on them?
Last time I checked, I think they
Yeah.
do.
So you still got that. They still have mechanical parts. There's still a piece of machinery, and machinery is going to need things maintained on it, or things are going to break on it. And that's where we come in. So again, it's just the investment in technology, the investment in the training and the knowledge to continue to evolve with the industry as it continues to evolve, and with the consumer too, because we have to educate the consumer why it costs this much now, and you have to do this service that you've never heard of before and didn't have to pay that much for on your last car because your last car didn't have that technology. Now it does. So you have to be able to explain that to the consumer in a way that they understand that you're not just raising your ticket average. So
Yeah, that doesn't work out too well, and that is
mhm,
definitely more true than ever. Very friendly issued the dare for anybody who's renting a car out there to push
mhm,
your rental car from Hertz you're going to have all these features that you didn't know cost money to maintain, and
mhm,
it's not small dollar amounts anymore.
right. Yep.
Uh, so yeah, we get that feedback a lot. We hear about this a lot.
But
What
it's
is
cool. I mean, people like it. People like all the cool features.
It's amazing.
It would be great not to have to touch the steering wheel, But
Uh,
with that, you're right, comes a cost. So
I am the guy who will take a rental car, which goodness knows if they're calibrated correctly, put it on auto cruise control and the lane at, I don't
mhm,
care, Kia, whatever, 80
lane
miles an hour
departure.
and start writing emails.
Mhm.
Is that the right way to do it? I probably don't dare anybody to do that, but it does work. It's pretty remarkable. We're talking about a
Mhm.
do off the lot Kia from some Hertz dealer, or a
Yep.
rental car center. So, Ray, with all of this that we've talked about, I think, from our side of the business, what I would say is if you're thinking of divesting or selling your business, it is not as difficult of a conversation to have as people often think.
Mhm.
To your earlier point, there's a very good chance that your tire shops are worth more than you may know. Um, and I don't see, for all intents and purposes, valuations or values going all that much more higher than they are today, especially for one, two, three shop owners.
True.
But eventually, on the larger scale, there will be some sort of retraction and correction here because this is not sustainable.
Absolutely. It'll have to be. You're right. It's not sustainable, and you're going to lose that leverage. And the last thing that we want is what we've seen in other industries. It became overly expensive, and the valuation doesn't hold. And we've talked about companies that haven't met their covenants, and I mean it's a big hill to climb to get there, but man, it is a very sheer cliff to fall off of if you're not careful on the other side. So
And liquidity is not always there. That's one thing
mhm.
I can promise you the car wash side of the world has seen.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think that a lot of folks, not a lot, but there are folks that look at the acquisition as another unit in their collection and don't dig deep enough to find out what makes that place tick. And I can tell you in previous lives, we've walked away from some deals of some very great operating businesses, super productive, high revenue, strong bottom line. And the reason was, Harry, because we didn't think we could emulate what that specific owner was doing. And if we couldn't emulate that, we were going to take a 20-25% haircut right out of the gate, and it's let's not break it. Let's be self-aware to say we can't operate it like that. Let's not buy it, or we're going to break it, and it's not going to give us the return. It's not. So there
Hardest
will be some of
conversation,
that. Mhm.
hardest conversation to have. You've run your business too well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
exists.
we can't do it. So you're going to have to keep it.
That's how life rewards you. It penalizes you for doing an
Mhm.
exceptional, extraordinary, and irreplicable job.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there are people out there, maybe you have another independent owner that's looking to get 2 or 3,
Sure.
4 or 5 shops in the area. Maybe that's a better appeal, but got to be careful with that stuff. Now, if you have 1,000 locations or 1,500 locations and you break one, probably not detrimental. But you don't want to do that too often because, like we said, then you lose that leverage, and it doesn't take long for the question mark on maybe we need to reevaluate our M&A strategy because the last several deals we did aren't producing the results that we thought they were going to produce. So then you hit that stall internally in M&A, and somebody else is going to come along and grab it. So
Yeah, and I would go one step further, Ray, as a last note on my end here, which is that sort of appetite for the best of the best operators actually incrementally shrinks the further into this consolidation cycle we go. Because as the
mhm,
consolidators get bigger, they become less willing to take on that risk. But the
mhm,
smaller, more nimble ones are willing to say, hey, we might lose 10% of what you're doing. When there are 200 stores, they're saying, hey, we're going to lose 25, 30%.
right.
So this is going to be a
Mhm.
wonderfully interesting time to watch. Ray, anything else you want to leave the viewers and listeners with here?
No, it's just I appreciate the opportunity. I love talking shop, you know that. Could have these conversations all day long when it comes to the tire industry, but big opportunity out there still. And it's just it's a great industry to be in. That's often, as I said earlier, recession resilient. Folks are always going to need their cars, and it's just it'll to your point, it'll be exciting to see how this all continues to progress with PE and with larger brand companies and some companies spinning off retail stores and focusing on other facets of the business. And I feel like somewhere along the line we haven't seen them yet, but there's going to be some new players beginning to emerge that think about these independents, and maybe someone who has 10 or 12 stores is willing to take on another 10 or 12 stores to make it 20 or 30 stores. And we're going to have some new regional players start to sneak up out of all this. So it'll be exciting to watch it.
I cannot wait, Ray. So for all of our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for tuning in this week. And stay tuned for many more to come. And Ray, thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.